all are kidnapped to avoid that very fate. But in return, they are fed. We try to fight it. The prototype's control. I am the last of the smiling critters.
Greetings, people of YouTube, and welcome back to Random Nation Studios and a brand new installment of Who's On First. Holy cow, has it been a crazy year. At the time of me writing this script, my last uploaded channel was about 8 whole months ago. During that time, I got my bachelor's degree, I got a job, quit that job, started a Discord server, and now I'm working on building an online shop with Shopify. Hashtag not spawn. But more on that at the end of the video. Oh, and if you haven't noticed, I also have a new avatar. And yes, before anyone asks, it is very much inspired by Husk from Has Been Hotel. He is my best boy. I have a lot of love for the show, flawed though it may be.
I apologize for nothing.
Let's see what else. Oh yeah, we also have a subreddit and an Instagram now. Both are still very new, so there's not much to see yet, but I anticipate more and more fun will be had as more randos join and follow. And if you're interested in joining or just want to check us out, links to all that and more will be listed down below. And now that that shameless self-promotion is out of the way, let's dive into the real reason you clicked on this video. I'll admit, I wasn't sure what to talk about for my first video going into 2025. There are just so many topics to choose from. And by topics, of course, I mean games. Little Nightmares 3, Reanimal, FNAF, Secrets of the Mimic, the upcoming Bendy games, and even the recently released Joyville 2 seemed like they'd make for great theory fodder. However, I'm admittedly a bit late to the party on just about every game that I could talk about, and a few of them I don't feel like I have enough information on to really get into. That said, if you bothered to read the title, you'd know that I decided to go with an old favorite, Poppy Playtime. Yep, we're diving back into the never-ending fever dream that is Playtime Co. And given Chapter 4 isn't too far away, it just felt appropriate. I actually did have another theory video planned talking about the true identity of Dog Day, and while I still believe there's merit to that theory, I've decided to shelve it for now because I don't feel I have enough objective evidence yet. If it turns out I'm right, you can bet I'm going to be crowing about it all over my socials, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. So, why did I pick the Nightmare Critters? Well, because they seem like the easiest characters to theorize about. Not only that, but like the Smiling Critters in Chapter 3, the Nightmares are arguably the most interesting aspect of Chapter 4 that I've seen. Yeah, I know, everyone's raging about Dr. Sawyer and Yarnaby, yada yada yada. However, I don't think I've seen anybody really talking about the Nightmare Critters since Mob Entertainment posted Maggie Mako's character card over on Twitter. That and I do have a theory, or maybe it's more of a hypotheses, that, if correct, makes the Nightmare's backstory even more tragic than almost any other experiments that we've seen so far. First, I think we need to touch on what the point of the Smiling Critters are, and what that may or may not have meant for the Nightmare's role within the larger story. We really didn't learn too much about the Smiling Critters in Chapter 3, but we've learned a few interesting details from materials that came out after Chapter 3's release. Perhaps one of the most telling was this lore note included in the third post of Mob's 12 Days of Playtime. The note says, "A collection of experiments made in the image of the less than successful Smiling Critter toys. Each one was meant to have a unique role in the Playcare, but of course not all of them were successful." Notice how the phrase "less than successful" is written in quotation marks? I'm not entirely certain why that is, but it feels kind of sus to me. But then there's the whole line about how all the critters had a unique role within the Playcare, which honestly makes perfect sense to me. But then, what about the Nightmare Critters? If the Smiling Critters were made into bigger bodies to fill a role within the factory, then the nightmares had to have been made for a similar function, right? And we know that there were experiments of the nightmare critters because Mom Entertainment said as much in their 12 Days of Playtime. The nightmare critters lore note reads, a line of experiments that built off their predecessors, the smiling critters. Ironically, most of the smiling and nightmare critter experiments got along rather well, at least for a time. Keep this in mind because we will be revisiting this note later. In one of his Poppy Playtime theories, fellow YouTuber Terrico showed evidence that there's a high probability that both sets of critters were present in the Playcare, or at least one of the nightmares was there at some point. I'll put a link to that video at the end if you'd like to watch it for yourself. But if the nightmare critters were in the Playcare, what would have been the point? Let me put it this way. If you look at the smiling critters, it's very clear these characters are intended to reflect the character traits and behaviors that Playtime Co. wanted to instill in children, namely those who lived in the factory's orphanage program. Heck, one could make the argument that the cartoon itself was a form of propaganda used to encourage these behaviors. For example, the video with Catnap putting the others to sleep could have been used to frame Catnap's red smoke as a good thing that the children should be excited for rather than terrified of. Now let's look at the nightmare critters. While the smiling critters were very much coded as younger kids with ideal traits and behaviors, the nightmare critters feel more like tweens or teenagers whose character traits are less than ideal. Some of them are characterized as being polar opposites of some of the smiling critters, while others feel more like parallels, if that makes sense. For example, while Hoppy Hopscotch is energetic and enthusiastic, Alistair Gator is described as an all-around lazy guy who would prefer good things come to him rather than putting in the necessary work to get it. And then you have a case like Picky Piggy and Maggie Mako. Picky Piggy's whole shtick is eating healthy, and from her cutout voice lines in Chapter 3, she gives off the impression of being a bit of a foodie. Maggie Mako has a similar vibe to her description. However, she's not just a food lover, she's a junk food junkie. Sure, Picky may have a weakness for PB&Js, but Maggie is... I've heard of putting cheese sauce on broccoli to make it taste better, but... oh my lord. But perhaps the most fascinating case in this game of opposites is that of Poe and Dog Day. Going back to his description, Dog Day is described as the sunny, strong, and determined leader of the smiling critters. His character is intended to always have a cheery, upbeat, and look on the bright side, or there's always a silver lining kind of attitude that keeps his friends in good spirits no matter how grim things might seem. And now let's look at Poe's description. It says, Poe hates the sun and thinks it's a cruel trick of nature that the world needs it in the first place. Most comfortable in the dark, they spend their nights hanging around graveyards, listening to music, and feeling vaguely angry at nothing in particular. They insist it isn't a phase. It seems to me that Poe is intended to be the complete opposite of Dog Day. Basically, they're your typical moody, emo teen. However, the fact that they're stated to hate the sun, the symbol of the smiling critters leader, makes me wonder just how well, if at all, their bigger body versions got along back in the day. Again, the lore notes said that the nightmare and smiling critter experiments got along pretty well, but something clearly caused the two friend groups to break up. Could personality have had a role in their falling out? It's possible? We'll come back to this idea in just a little bit, but I'd like to touch on the idea that both critters coexisted in the Playcare at some point. We see what could be Poe in a children's drawing in the trailer for Chapter 3, and yet we've never even heard of the nightmare critters' existence until Chapter 4. Obviously, the most likely real-world explanation is that there were plans to include them, but complications required Mob Entertainment to remove their involvement and move them into Chapter 4. However, this decision had a major impact on the in-universe lore and events of the Poppy Playtime universe. What was that impact? Well, I'm guessing that we will likely run into not just the smaller nightmare critter experiments, but also at least one of the bigger body nightmare critters at some point during Chapter 4. Personally, my money is on it either being Poe or Raby Baby, possibly Baba Chops, but that's a topic for another video. Getting back to the topic at hand, however, I've got to be honest, the Nightmare Critters' existence feels so strange to me. Why would Playtime Co. even bother making them if their predecessors weren't even successful? I mean, the cartoon series flopped, the toys themselves didn't sell too well. I can definitely see how the Smiling Critters as bigger body mascots make sense, as the characters do seem quite appropriate for the kinds of roles the Playcare would need to fill. The Nightmare Critters, however, feel completely unnecessary.
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
What was the point of making them in the first place? Why expand the Critter cast when the line was a flop? Well, buckle up because this is where things get kinda heavy. So, remember how I said that the Smiling Critters cartoons could have been like Playtime Co.'s own in-house propaganda? Well, the Nightmare Critters, assuming they also appeared in the cartoon at some point, would have helped to serve that function. While the Smiling Critters were intended to demonstrate to the children ideal ways to behave, according to Playtime's cultish doctrine, the Nightmare Critters were intended to show children how not to behave. These more teen-coded characters, despite still being literal children themselves, would have been framed as the bad guys of the show, and present the Smiling Critter team with situations and challenges that they would have had to overcome by sticking to their correct and Playtime-approved ways. They would have had to defeat the bad children by behaving and making the right choices, as good children should. Don't be a gossipy busybody like Raby Baby. Instead, you should be kind and considerate like Bobby Bear Hug. Don't be a moody, grumpy Gus that's always in a bad mood like Poe. Instead, be sunny and cheery. Always have something positive to say, like good old Dog Day. You get the idea. Simply put, these characters were literally only made to be disliked. They are the Joker to the Smiling Critters' Batman, the Captain Pollution to their Captain Planet, the Legion of Doom to their Super Friends. Okay, honestly, that last one is probably closest to what they were going for thematically. But that begs the question, what about their bigger body counterparts? Well, I do have a theory that might provide an answer. Not only might it offer an in-universe explanation for why the Nightmare Critters were never seen or mentioned in Chapter 3, but it might also explain why the Playhouse had holding cells for the Smiling Critters to be kept in when they weren't up visiting the children in the Playcare. We've seen several operating room and hospital-like areas throughout this factory. We saw one in Chapter 2, we saw flashes of one in the Braun VHS video, we saw one in Home Sweet Home in Chapter 3. Granted, that one was during a gas-induced hallucination, but I wouldn't be shocked at all if it was an actual physical area. We also saw one in the most recent Chapter 4 trailer, so I think it's safe to assume that we're going to see at least one of these rooms during Chapter 4, likely very close to the prison's holding facility. These spaces are likely where all the major bigger body experiments and procedures were conducted, mascots were operated on or given follow-up operations, maybe even autopsied after a transfer failed. Among the numerous experiments turned out here was, of course, the Smiling and Nightmare Critters. Now, I have my suspicions that the Nightmare Critters were intended only as experiment fodder and therefore never intended to leave the prison area, but the Smiling Critters obviously were. My guess is that the surviving critter experiments probably spent a good amount of time down here, and while there were a few exceptions, the two groups of critters got along fairly well until they learned that the Smiling Critters would be moving up to the Playcare while the Nightmare Critters were going to be kept down in the prison indefinitely. Now, there is another possibility, that being that the Nightmare Critters did live in the Playcare with the Smiling Critters for a short time, but for some reason they were sent back to the prison level where they were to be kept possibly forever. either way, once the experiments learned about what was going to happen to them, the two factions clashed quite often, typically resulting from the nightmares lashing out in their anger, feelings of betrayal, jealousy, possibly even abandonment. Unfortunately, things were not all sunshine and rainbows for Dog Day and his gang once they were finally moved up to the Playcare. As well, they did get to play and interact with the orphans. When they weren't doing meet and greets with the kids, they were being kept locked up in the back room of the playhouse. Now, maybe the staff did this because they were instructed to by the scientists. Maybe the higher-ups gave them an order to do it. Maybe it was a comfort thing, as crazy as that might sound. Maybe they did it because that's what the critters were used to, having spent so much of their time down in the prison level. Or maybe they did it because they were afraid the critters were dangerous, which kind of makes sense. I mean, when you look at Dog Day, it's very clear that these mascots were intelligent. Regardless, the smiling critters were doomed to be prisoners forever, which, assuming they never stepped foot in the Playcare themselves, the nightmare critters would have had no way of knowing this. Or maybe one of them knew. Back to Terrico's video, at one point he mentions a few moments in the last trailer for Chapter 3 where we saw glimpses of a character who did not match any of the smiling critters. Now, in this one frame, you can see a creature that you could argue is Kickin' Chicken, but we now know that he's no longer around. And then there's the kid's drawing, which I guess could be Chicken, but why is he purple? If this is Kickin' Chicken, why would the child draw him with a purple crayon? Unless the child was colorblind? Maybe? Question mark?
By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, no, this can't be Kickin' Chicken. Now, I lightly touched on this earlier, and while I can't swear to anything, I heard somewhere that Mob had intended to introduce these characters in Chapter 3, but because of some real-world nonsense, the game's release was postponed, a lot of stuff ended up being cut, and now it's being repurposed for Chapter 4. Which, if that's true, it kind of sucks, but in other ways, this could make things much more interesting. We know that experiments getting out of containment was far from unheard of. We know Huggy got out at least once, and now thanks to the ARG, we know that there was a massive fire in the Playtime Theater that was almost certainly caused by one of Sawyer's creations.
What half-wit, soon-to-be dead man made this mistake? Dr. Harley Sawyer.
So if Huggy could manage to get out of the factory entirely, why couldn't one of the other experiments get out of the prison and into the Playcare? We know at least one did, the prototype. In fact, he had to have managed to get up there multiple times. How else would he have been able to meet with Theodore Grambel, the kid who became Catnap, befriend him, and convince him to help the prototype escape the factory? Going back to the drawing, I guess this kid could have just tried to draw Poe from the cartoon, but that doesn't feel very satisfying. We've seen children's drawings all over the place, and almost all of them feature at least one Playtime Co character. Mommy Longlegs, PJ, Braun. So why not the critters as well? Honestly, the fact that a child felt the need to draw one of the nightmare critters at all tells me that they know these creatures exist. They drew Poe because they've seen Poe. But if Poe could get as far as the Playcare, why not try to escape the factory entirely like Huggy tried to do? Well, I think it may have something to do with Dog Day. Yeah, I know, but there could be something to it when you look at the 6th post from Mob's 12 Days of Playtime. On day 6, we got this post showing an image of the Bigger Bodies Dog Day, and his lore note reads, Dog Day, by all accounts, is unconditionally loyal to the prototype. But wait, that can't be right, can it? Perhaps it's a case of keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Keep your enemies closer, Now, aside from the prototype himself, who else could potentially fit that description? Of course, there is a chance that these two weren't enemies so much as rivals, depending on which faction Poe and the other nightmares align themselves with after the toys takeover. It's also very possible that the Smiling and Nightmare critters were reluctant allies during the event. While I think most of the experiments were on board with the Hour of Joy, even if only out of the desire to be free from the scientists, it's obvious that any loyalty to the prototype was tenuous at best. And given there's a chance some of these experiments were made using former employees, I feel like their aligning themselves with 1006 was done more so out of desperation than any genuine devotion or love like Catnap had. With that in mind, there's a good chance that, like with Dog Day, we may run into at least one of the nightmare critters that turn out to be friendly, or at least a reluctant ally to us. Desperate times and all that. And honestly, I would be all here for it. Lord knows I feel like Mob Entertainment kinda owes us after the goodest boy got royally shafted in his premiere chapter. Don't get me wrong, the segment with Dog Day was great, but I feel like they could have done so much more with him, and the fact that his presence in the game so far has just been a minor lore dump followed by a chase scene and possible off-screen death is just... oh, why? But what do y'all think? I know this video is less of a proper game theory and more like a bunch of rambling, but regardless of what you want to call it, we won't know what's what until Chapter 4 finally comes out later this month, and when it does, I will definitely be watching all of the playthroughs, looking for any opportunities to make another theory video about it. Wish me luck, y'all. Hey there, internet people. Thanks so much for making it to the outro. I really hope y'all enjoyed the video. And don't forget, Random Nation Studios now has numerous new ways that you can be part of the nation and embrace the weirdness. Check the links down below if you'd like to join or follow us over on our Discord server, subreddit, Instagram, and more. Also, check out the Random Nation's new eShop, where you can buy some crazy cool fan and fandom-inspired art by yours truly. It's all pay to download, meaning that I will not be selling physical prints of my work, at least not at this time. The shop is still a bit of a work in progress, but it is up and there are things to buy. All proceeds go towards supporting the channel, the shop, and the business's growth. And as a special bonus, if you use the code IMRANDOM, you'll get 15% off your first purchase. The code's deadline has been extended to January 28th, so if you'd like to get some sweet art at a great discount, you better act now. And remember, even if you don't see something you like, more art is going to be added, and you can always sign up for our email alerts, which will give you access to special discounts and let you know when new art is uploaded to the shop. One more thing, as you can imagine, since I currently don't have a regular paying job, I'm a bit strapped for cash, but you can help by donating to our GoFundMe page. We're hoping to raise $10,000 to help with advertising, making improvements to the shop, and increase investment and spending on existing features. So whether you enjoy funky fan art or would just like to help a creator and their fledgling business, please consider making a donation to the Random Nation Studios GoFundMe. Whether it's $1 or $100, every single penny counts. A link will be provided down below, or you can scan the QR code on your screen right now to visit the page and make a donation. Also, if you'd be so kind as to share the link around to help get more eyes on the fundraiser, I would greatly appreciate it. But with that last ounce of brain power depleted, I'm going to go get into some comfy clothes, grab a snack, and watch Reddit review videos on my TV. I hope to see you all next time. Until then, remember to stay safe, stay awesome, and stay random. Peace.